Welcome to the family tree. Let's look at phylogeny and descent with modification. Be able to define homology, monophyletic, polyphyletic, paraphyletic, branch, node, root, and clade. Be able to draw a phylogenetic tree. We'll be doing an activity in class. Relate descent with modification to selection. Find a most recent common ancestor to any two organisms on a phylogenetic tree. And define homoplasy or analogous traits. Give examples and contrast with homology. A phylogeny is essentially a family tree, but with species instead of relatives. So you can see the ancient house of black and the Homo sapiens family tree both have branches and things at the end of branches and things in between branches. We can look at it again here with some dolphins. We can see all the different species and how they are related based on a family tree. Homologous traits are any traits shared by two or more organisms due to shared ancestry, and we can see that such as in the baleen whales, which all have baleen. So name some homologous traits shared by whales in class, name some shared by whales and other mammals. We'll be doing that in class, of course. You can think of some on your own. Analogous traits are traits two organisms share that their common ancestor lacked. So if you think about fins in both dolphins and sharks, their common ancestor did not necessarily have fins. And at one point, mammals did not have fins. They roamed on land before they went back to the ocean and became dolphins. So phylogeny can depend on paleontology. We can track records of organisms that lived in different places based on the fossils that they leave. And we can imply phylogeny based on those records. We know that younger fossils look more like modern organisms and older fossils look more like extinct organisms. We can even see change over time in fossils in an area. For example, we see whale paleontology where older whale fossils have hips and legs. We see the skull elongate in more recent whale fossils. The hip bones disappear and leg bones become vestigial. This is evidence of change over time in fossils. Phylogeny also relates to heritability. Evolution, of course, requires that traits are heritable, unlike this bonsai tree where the trait of being short and small is not heritable. So not all traits are going to be seen in the phenotype, and we are going to talk about some genetic traits in class, but you can look those up in your book and on your own. Remember that a phylogeny is a hypothesis. We believe that Homo sapiens evolved one way, and this can be tested. There are three hypotheses shown here of Homo sapiens evolution, whether it be an African species that replaced all of the other species of Homo, whether it be hybridization between different species of Homo and Homo sapiens, or whether Homo sapiens evolved in different places at the same time, leading to different races. This last one has been thoroughly disproven. Descent with modification also comes from natural selection. So we know that elephants have been selected to have larger ears in Africa because these are going to cause more heat to leave the body. And what we see is there is variation in elephant ear size, with Mammuthus having very small ears and Loxodonta africana having very large ears. There is variation, and this ear size is heritable, and there was differential survival and reproduction. We do not see Mammuthus in Africa. We actually don't see Mammuthus at all anymore because it was specifically very hairy, very woolly, so it could survive in colder climates. We're going to look at phylogenetic trees, and here's one way to think of them. They are nested like those little Russian dolls, where you have a species within a genus, within a family, within an order, within a class, within a phylum, within a kingdom, within a domain. And we can display that on these phylogenetic trees. And these trees allow us to look at the most recent common ancestor. That's number one here is the most recent common ancestor between the mustelids and the canids. The most recent common ancestor between coyotes and wolves is here at number 2. If you were to find the most recent common ancestor between otter and coyote, you would go to, that's right, number 1 again. So let's look at how to read a phylogenetic tree. We can see branch points where things are going to diverge. We see a polytomy in part 5 there, and we see a branch point representing a common ancestor of taxa A through G at number 1. We're going to use the terms branch, node, clade, and roots. Let's look at this phylogenetic tree. 2 of these are mislabeled, so let's take a look and find which ones. That's right, it was root and branch. Root would actually be taxon G, and branch is anything branching off. So what is a node? A node is anywhere that has the most recent common ancestors. What is the root? The root is the most recent common ancestor to all of them, but not the node representing that, but rather the outgroup that we can see representing that. A branch is any one of those sticks that's going to end in what we call a taxon. And a clade is any group that contains one or more taxa. So we're going to make a phylogeny in class. You can do this on your own. There are multiple correct answers. There are different ways of looking at clades in organisms. We can actually organize a group of things such as everything that swims, or all things we call protists. And those will be different forms of groups, and those may or may not be useful forms of group. We prefer the monophyletic group, where all these organisms have the same common ancestor, and this common ancestor gives rise to all organisms in the group. There's also a paraphyletic group where all these organisms have a common ancestor, but the common ancestor does not give rise to all the organisms in the group. There are some outliers not included in the group, like land-dwelling mammals would exclude whales. And then we have a polyphyletic group where these organisms do not share a most recent common ancestor, but have included some things that are descended along different lineages. Saying algae would be one of these. Green algae and red algae have a common ancestor, but brown algae does not share a common ancestor with green algae and red algae. So here's a nice simplified way of looking at this. Homoplasy is another problem. It's where we have a common problem getting a common solution, like digging underground gives rise to both the Australian marsupial mole, the North American eutherian mole, and even moles in Africa. And that's called convergent evolution, when similar traits evolve due to similar pressures being put on different lineages. The most recent common ancestor for moles did not have these mole-like traits. We call it a homoplasy if it's a structure like these digging feet that arose independently in two or more lineages. It's a common design solution to a common selection pressure.